It is 10:47 p.m. just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Freezing rain falls on the empty bus station. A 7'1" giant walks inside. He hunches down under his wet rain poncho. This is Shaquille O'Neal. He is an NBA legend, with 4 championship rings. But tonight, he is just a lonely man, with a broken car and a dead phone. A 51-year-old janitor has worked here for 14 years. He makes just $11.20 an hour. Quietly, he shares his only power bank with the giant. He also gives him a $3.50 sandwich bought with spare coins. But this kindness breaks strict station rules. The security camera records everything. Now, the man might lose the only job that feeds his family. The older worker faces cold rules and a hard struggle to get by. What will the kind giant do to save his helper? This real-life fairy tale begins with a choice the next morning. But long before that cold night, life had already worn this man down for years. His name was Grady Miller. He was 51 years old. He had worked inside this small bus station for 14 long years. Every shift started the exact same way. He filled his mop bucket near the back hallway. The old wheels squeaked across cracked floor tiles near the bus doors. Oil stains marked the concrete by gate 3. They never fully washed away, no matter how hard Grady scrubbed at them. His hip ached every time he bent down low to wring out the mop. He had felt that same dull pain for almost 6 years now. He never complained about it out loud. He just rolled his shoulders, took a slow breath, and kept moving down the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above him all night long. Grady barely noticed that sound anymore after 14 years of hearing it. He knew every crack in the floor by heart. He knew which bench wobbled, which door stuck, and which vending machine ate quarters without giving anything back. He knew the schedule of every late bus that rolled through after midnight. He knew which travelers came back week after week, heading to the same far-off cities. Some nights he swept the same hallway 3 or 4 times just to keep his hands busy. It helped him think less about the bills waiting for him at home. The job paid little, but it had once felt steady and safe. Lately, even that small comfort felt thinner with every passing month. During a short break, Grady sat down on an overturned bucket near the loading dock. He pulled out his phone to check his bank balance again. The screen showed $17.42. That small number sat there glowing, cold and final, in the dark. He stared at it for a long moment, as if staring might somehow change it. The number stayed exactly the same, no matter how long he looked. He had just paid $4,217.83 for his daughter's insulin. The pharmacy bill arrived 3 days earlier than he expected this month. His daughter needed that medicine every single month without fail. There was no version of this life where Grady could simply skip that payment. His basement apartment cost $1,250 a month to rent. He was already 3 weeks behind on it now. A red notice sat folded inside his back pocket. It warned him, in plain letters, about a coming eviction date. Grady kept that paper close, almost like a small stone tucked inside his shoe. He felt it every time he sat down or stood back up again. He had not yet told his daughter about the notice. He kept hoping, somehow, that an extra shift or 2 might fix things before she ever found out. He thought about his daughter sleeping safely at home right now. He pictured the quiet hum of her small bedroom fan in the dark. He thought about rent day creeping closer with every single shift he worked. Some long nights, that thought followed him quietly from gate to gate. Outside, the rain kept falling steady against the tall station windows. It blurred the orange parking lot lights into long, smeared streaks. He had worked through storms before. He had worked through summer heat that turned the lobby into an oven. None of it had ever felt easy. Still, Grady showed up every single night. He believed, in some quiet way, that steady work was its own kind of dignity. His own father had taught him that lesson many years ago. A man could lose almost anything in life, but never his word. Grady carried that lesson with him through every long, tiring shift. It had carried him through harder years than this one, somehow. Across town, a very different kind of night was already unfolding. A man walked alone through cold, steady rain along a dark highway shoulder. His SUV had broken down, without warning, miles from anything familiar to him. He had no driver waiting nearby tonight. He had no warm car, no team, no comfortable place to simply sit and wait it out. This man stood 7 feet 1 inch tall. His shoes were a massive size 23, already soaked completely, through by now. Tonight, none of his fame mattered out here in the dark and cold. He was simply a tired man, far from anywhere he called home. He had spent years surrounded by crowds, cameras, and people calling his name. Tonight, there was no one around him at all, only rain and empty road. His phone had died nearly an hour earlier, somewhere back on the highway. He had no way left to call for help or tell anyone where he was. He walked toward the only glowing light he could see for miles around. It came from a small, tired bus station sitting near the edge of town. Wind cut hard across the empty parking lot outside the building. Rain hit the tall windows again and again, like tiny stones tapping steadily on glass. Inside, a few tired travelers slept in uncomfortable plastic chairs near the far wall. Their heads tilted at odd angles, jackets pulled up like thin, makeshift blankets. One older woman clutched a worn duffel bag tightly against her chest, even in her sleep. A young man nearby had his sneakers off, drying slowly near a heating vent. None of them stirred, as the wind howled outside the windows. The station, for all its cracks and cold floors, still offered some kind of shelter tonight. Grady leaned on his mop handle and glanced up slowly at the clock. It read almost 11 p.m., with many slow, quiet hours still ahead of him. Some nights, the silence inside that station felt heavier than any of the actual work itself. Grady had learned, slowly over the years, how to carry that weight without saying a single word about it. Then the front doors swung open hard against the wind. Cold night air rushed straight into the warm little lobby all at once. A massive shape stepped through the doorway, ducking his head low just to fit underneath the frame above him. The big man pulled his soaked poncho hood even lower over his face. He clearly did not want to startle the sleeping travelers nearby in the dim room. He glanced slowly around the small, dim space. Then he noticed something strange lining the entire far wall near the seating area. Every single outlet had been covered with a small, locked metal box. Each one looked sealed tight, almost like a tiny steel safe bolted to the wall. Months earlier, station management had quietly ordered those boxes installed everywhere inside the building. Workers were told it would stop homeless people from charging phones overnight without permission. Grady noticed the stranger moving slowly from outlet to outlet, checking each cover carefully. Every box stayed locked tight, no matter how gently he tugged at the small metal latch. Finally, the big man turned toward Grady, his voice low and almost a little shy. He explained that his phone had died completely hours earlier on the highway. His car had broken down somewhere out behind him in the dark. He asked, very politely, if any single outlet anywhere still worked inside the building tonight. Grady felt his stomach tighten the second he heard that simple, quiet question. He already knew exactly why every single outlet stayed locked up tonight. Only yesterday, his supervisor had written him up for the very first time in 14 years. The note claimed Grady wasted time helping passengers instead of focusing on his real job duties. That supervisor's name was Caleb Mercer. He ran the night shift like a strict, humorless drill sergeant patrolling his own small kingdom. One more write-up, and Grady would lose this job completely and immediately. His family had absolutely no real backup plan, if that ever happened to them. Grady looked down slowly at his own torn, water-stained work boots. Then he looked up at the stranger's enormous, dripping sneakers, soaked clean through at size 23. Fear pulled hard at him, from one side of his tired mind. Something softer, older, and warmer pulled just as hard from the other side of his heart. For a moment, neither feeling won. Grady simply stood there, caught between two versions of himself in that quiet hallway. In that quiet, narrow moment, he remembered his father's voice from many years earlier. His father had worked deep inside a Tennessee coal mine until his body finally gave out completely. His father used to say that poverty could take almost everything away from a man, but it could never take away his basic kindness toward another struggling human being. Grady could still picture his father's hands, rough and scarred, from decades in the mine. Those hands had still found ways to share food with hungry neighbors. The mop bucket sat forgotten beside him, water slowly going still and cold. Grady barely noticed it anymore, his mind fixed entirely on the stranger in front of him. Grady made his choice right there in that narrow, fluorescent hallway. He decided that one strict rule mattered far less than the tired man standing before him now. His heartbeat picked up slightly as he made the decision. Some part of him already knew there might be a price to pay later. He reached into his worn canvas work bag without saying a single word. Inside sat his only personal power bank, a small $12 device he carried everywhere he went. He pulled it out gently and held it toward the stranger, without any hesitation at all in his hands. He also dug through his front pocket for a few last loose coins he had left. He walked over to the old vending machine and bought a $3.50 turkey sandwich. He handed both items over quietly, careful not to let his voice carry too far down the hallway. His hands shook slightly as he passed them over, though not from the cold this time. Something about the moment felt heavier than the simple act itself. He told the big man that the night outside was bitterly cold tonight. He said the stranger needed this power bank far more than Grady ever would tonight. The giant lowered himself slowly onto a low plastic chair nearby in the corner. His knees folded almost up to his chest because the seat was clearly built far too small for him. For a moment, he looked almost comical squeezed into that tiny chair. Then he simply smiled, grateful for somewhere dry to sit. Neither man asked for the other's name right away in that quiet moment. Neither man asked about jobs, paychecks, fame, or any social status at all between them. They simply began talking, two complete strangers quietly passing time inside an empty, humming room together. The big man asked, gently, how long Grady had worked at this small station. Grady answered honestly, surprised at how easy it felt to talk to a stranger. He admitted the work had grown harder on his body every single year. Still, he said, a job was a job, and his family needed it badly. The big man spoke softly about growing up poor in Newark, New Jersey, many years before. He remembered his mother standing for hours in long lines, just to bring home free bread for the family. He remembered the smell of that bread, warm and plain, carried home through cold streets. It had tasted, back then, like the best thing in the entire world. He remembered, too, neighbors who shared what little they had, without ever being asked. Those small memories had stayed with him long after fame and money arrived. Grady shared his own daily struggle to keep a roof over his daughter's head every month. He talked about juggling bills that never seemed to shrink, no matter how carefully he planned ahead. He mentioned, quietly, how his daughter still smiled every morning despite everything happening around her. That small detail seemed to matter to the big man more than anything else said. The big man nodded slowly, his huge hands wrapped loosely around the half-eaten sandwich. He said quiet strength-like, that often runs deepest in the people no one ever notices. Grady almost laughed at that. No one had called him strong in a very long time. He admitted, almost to himself, that some nights he wondered if all this struggle even meant anything. The big man simply listened, letting the question sit quietly between them. He said that meaning often shows up late, long after the hardest nights are over. Sometimes a person never gets to see it themselves until much later. Grady looked down at the cracked tile floor and said nothing more for a while. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. Something quiet, almost sacred, passed silently between these two tired strangers in that moment. Neither man tried very hard to explain it out loud to the other. The old station, with its cracked tile floors and humming overhead lights, suddenly felt a little less lonely than it had only minutes earlier. For a few short minutes, neither man thought about money, rules, or tomorrow's long list of problems waiting outside. The rain kept falling steadily against the glass behind them the entire time. Neither man seemed to notice it anymore. It almost felt, for those few minutes, like the whole world outside had quietly disappeared. But that small, peaceful moment did not last very long at all that night. Heavy footsteps echoed sharply down the narrow hallway behind them without warning. Caleb Mercer appeared, his uniform pressed and perfect even at this strange, late hour of night. He carried a small flashlight he clearly did not need for anything. He also wore a thin, practiced smile that never once reached his cold eyes. He spotted Grady sitting calmly instead of working at his usual pace. The mop bucket stood completely alone, forgotten in the corner near the wall behind him. Caleb's voice stayed flat and controlled, but every single word landed sharp and cold in the quiet room. He stood with perfect posture, the way he always did when reciting station rules from memory. Grady had heard that same tone before, many times over the years. He reminded Grady, very precisely, about Station Policy Section 14B word for word. It strictly banned employees from sharing personal property with strangers during working hours. He pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket right there in front of everyone watching. He began writing out a second formal warning, without asking a single real question first. His pen moved slowly across the page, almost as if he enjoyed the moment. Grady watched in silence, his jaw tight, but his hands perfectly still. The big stranger tried calmly to step in and explain the simple situation. He said clearly that he was the one who had asked for help first tonight. Caleb barely glanced his way at all during the exchange. He said the station ran strictly on rules, never on feelings, then turned and walked away. He added, almost as an afterthought, that exceptions only created more problems down the line. Then he tucked his notepad away and straightened his pressed collar. He moved just as quickly as he had appeared only moments earlier in the hallway. Grady stood there silently, holding his mop handle once again in both hands. His silence said far more in that moment than any argument ever could have said out loud. The remaining travelers stirred slightly in their seats, sensing the sudden tension in the air. None of them said a single word about what they had just witnessed. The night ended slowly. After that, hour by hour, gate by gate, mop stroke by mop stroke. The next morning arrived fast, sharp, and completely unforgiving for everyone involved. At 8:15 a.m., Grady walked into a bright, cold office upstairs near the main lobby entrance. Caleb sat there beside the regional director, both men looking unusually serious and stiff this morning. A laptop screen on the desk showed clear footage from the station's security camera overnight. It captured every single second from the night before in painful, undeniable detail for everyone to see. The director paused the video right at the moment Grady handed over the power bank. He tapped the screen twice, as if the image alone proved everything they needed. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Grady's face carefully for any sign of weakness. Grady simply kept his eyes on the table in front of him. Outside the office window, the morning sun had barely broken through the clouds. The room felt colder than the weather alone could explain. They told Grady this counted as a serious safety and security violation under company policy. They slid a resignation form quietly across the table toward him, without much explanation. Signing it now, they explained calmly, would protect his personal work record going forward. Refusing it instead would leave a permanent black mark on his file forever, they warned him directly. Grady stared down at that single sheet of paper for a long, heavy moment in silence. He thought about his daughter's medicines sitting in their small refrigerator back home right now. He thought about his overdue rent and his 14 quiet years of loyal, steady service to this station. He thought, too, about the look on that big stranger's face the night before. It had not been the look of a man trying to cause anyone real trouble. For a brief second, Grady's hand actually reached toward the pen on the table. Then he stopped, remembering his father's old words about kindness once more. Then, slowly, he pushed the paper back across the table toward them both. His hand stayed steady this time, even though his heart was pounding hard inside his chest. He felt strangely calm, as if he had already made peace with whatever came next. He told them plainly that he had done nothing wrong by helping a freezing, desperate stranger that night. He said any rule built specifically to punish basic kindness was simply too cruel to follow. Caleb's jaw tightened visibly across the table, though his voice stayed icy and perfectly controlled throughout. He told Grady, flatly, that the decision was already final and beyond appeal. The regional director nodded along, saying nothing else to soften the moment. Grady felt something settle inside his chest heavy but strangely steady. He had expected fear in this moment, yet somehow it never fully arrived. Within the hour, station management officially terminated Grady's employment, without further discussion. There was no severance pay offered, and no continued health coverage for his family going forward at all. He packed 14 years of his working life into a single black trash bag quietly. He carried it slowly, through the same front doors he had walked through every single night before. His eyes burned red the entire walk home. That morning, though he refused to let himself cry openly. Still, he kept his shoulders straight, and his head held high the whole way back. Cars passed by on the wet street, splashing puddles near his already soaked shoes. He barely noticed, his mind still replaying the morning's conversation, over and over. Behind him, the bus station kept running exactly as before, as if nothing important had happened at all. Neighbors passing on the street had no idea what this quiet man had just lost. Grady simply walked on, his trash bag swinging gently at his side. Meanwhile, across town inside a quiet Knoxville hotel suite, a very different kind of morning was already unfolding for someone else. Shaquille O'Neal's assistant calmly explained everything that had happened overnight back at the bus station. Every small detail came out clearly, including the firing that quickly followed only hours later. Shaq listened closely the entire time, his expression growing more serious with every single sentence he heard. He understood clearly that one small act of kindness had cost a complete stranger absolutely everything he had. He sat quietly for a long moment. After his assistant finished speaking, the room stayed completely silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. He thought back to that small plastic chair and the way Grady had simply handed over his only charger without asking for anything in return. He remembered, too, the worn boots and the quiet pride in Grady's voice that night. None of it had asked for attention, and that was exactly what stayed with him. Shaq had met plenty of people chasing his autograph or his money over the years. He had rarely met someone who simply gave, expecting absolutely nothing back in return. He had no plans at all to simply send over a stack of cash to fix this. He believed that kind of gift often wounds a proud man's dignity far more than it ever truly helps him in the end. Instead, he picked up his phone and called the leadership team over at Palisade Pictures directly. He personally owned this growing chain of movie theaters spread across the entire state of Tennessee. He wanted to give this struggling, honest man a real and lasting chance at something better. Not simple charity handed down from above, but an honest opportunity to finally stand on his own 2 feet. He spoke briefly with the regional manager about the cleaning contracts already in place. He asked for one to be reassigned, quietly and without any public announcement. He gave the team clear instructions before ending the call that morning. Then he sat back, quietly thinking about the man who had given away his only power bank. Back inside his dim, quiet basement apartment, Grady sat staring blankly at his daughter's medical bill again. The long string of numbers on that page still refused to make any more sense than before tonight. The small apartment felt colder than usual, even with the heater running low in the corner. His daughter sat nearby, quietly doing homework at the kitchen table. She had no idea, yet, what had happened to her father that morning. She glanced up once and asked why he was home so early today. Grady simply smiled and told her not to worry about it. She went back to her pencil, without pressing further, trusting her father completely. Children, he often thought, could sense calm even when they could not name the reason. He watched her go back to her homework, pencil moving steadily across the page. For her sake, he kept his worry carefully hidden behind a calm face. A sudden, urgent knock broke sharply through the heavy silence of the small room that afternoon. Grady's heart jumped slightly before he even reached the door. Grady opened the door slowly, unsure of exactly what he might find waiting outside this time. Caleb Mercer stood there instead, pale and visibly shaking from nervous tension. Sweat soaked clearly through his collar, despite the cool morning air outside the building today. Corporate leadership had clearly come down hard on him sometime overnight, without much warning. His usually perfect uniform looked rumpled, as if he had dressed in a hurry. He kept glancing back, over his shoulder, as though someone important might be watching him. Caleb stammered nervously through his words, asking Grady to step outside, into the narrow alley behind the building. A row of polished black Cadillac Escalades waited there quietly, engines running smoothly in the cold morning air. Grady stepped outside slowly, into the alley, watched closely by curious, whispering neighbors gathering nearby on their porches. Shaquille O'Neal stepped out from the lead vehicle then, his massive frame blocking out most of the early morning sunlight behind him. He moved slowly toward Grady, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the cracked pavement. The neighbors watching nearby leaned forward, curious about what might happen next. For a moment, the entire alley seemed to fall completely silent. Even the neighbors stopped whispering as they watched. Caleb, now terrified of losing his own job too, quickly offered Grady his old position back immediately on the spot. He even promised an extra 50 cents added onto his hourly pay rate as an apology. Shaq did not raise his voice at all during any part of this exchange. He simply looked directly at Caleb with calm, steady, unblinking eyes from where he stood. That single quiet stare alone seemed to crush Caleb completely, from somewhere deep inside his chest. He fell silent almost instantly, unable to force out another single word in response. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of the last day had finally caught up with him. No one in the alley felt even the smallest bit of pity for him. The whole alley seemed to hold its breath for a few long seconds. Shaq then turned his full attention toward Grady, his expression softening immediately and visibly in front of everyone. He respectfully held out a smooth, dark leather folder, offered carefully with both of his large hands. Grady opened it slowly, his fingers trembling slightly, from a mix of nerves and complete disbelief at what he saw. Inside sat a fully signed contract for an exclusive commercial cleaning service agreement. It covered every single Palisade Pictures theater location across the entire state of Tennessee, start to finish. His new starting pay under this deal would be more than double his old hourly wage from before at the station. This was clearly not a simple handout of any kind, but a real and lasting business opportunity all his own. Grady read each line slowly, his eyes catching every careful, deliberate detail written into the offer. His hands shook slightly as he turned each page. He had never held a document like this in his entire life. He read the starting pay figure twice, just to make sure his eyes were not playing tricks on him. It was real, printed clearly in black ink on official paper. He thought, briefly, of the eviction notice still folded in his back pocket. For the first time in months, that paper suddenly felt much smaller. His neighbors watched quietly, from a short distance away, whispering softly among themselves about what this all might mean. Then Shaq reached quietly into his coat pocket and pulled something small out into the morning light for everyone to see. It was the very same scratched, $12 power bank Grady had handed him only the night before. The small device looked almost out of place in his enormous hand. Yet he held it, as carefully as if it were something far more valuable. He held it out gently, offering to return it back to its rightful owner, with a small, respectful nod. For a second, neither man moved, the small device sitting between their open palms. The whole alley seemed to lean in slightly, watching this quiet exchange unfold. Grady straightened his shoulders carefully, even though his old work shoes were still clearly worn through at the toes. He smiled and proudly insisted that Shaq simply keep the small device for himself instead. He said calmly that he could easily afford to buy a brand new one now, without any trouble. It was, of course, a small and very proud little lie between two grown men standing in an alley. Shaq understood exactly what that gentle lie really meant in that quiet, charged moment between them. It carried the quiet pride of a man who refused to ever feel pitied by anyone, even now, even after everything. He nodded back, with deep, visible respect, and slipped the small power bank carefully into his own vest pocket. From that day forward, he would carry it like a small, priceless treasure close to his heart. Grady walked straight back into his own struggling neighborhood later, that very same afternoon. He immediately hired 4 of his closest neighbors, all of them recently left, without any steady work of their own. He gave his brand new company one simple, unbreakable rule from day one onward, without exception. He gathered his 4 new workers on their very first morning and explained the rule clearly. He told them this was not just a slogan, but how the company would actually run. If anyone on a job site ever needed real help, his workers were told to help first and explain everything later. Around here, he said firmly, people always come before any single task or paycheck, full stop. Word of the new company spread quietly through the neighborhood within just a few short weeks that followed. Neighbors who once struggled separately now found steady, dignified work together under one single roof. The 4 men he hired learned quickly that this job meant something different than their old ones. They learned to take pride in small, careful work, the same way Grady always had. They showed up early, stayed late, and never once complained about the long hours. Each of them understood, in their own way, just how much this chance truly meant. One of them later told a neighbor that Grady never once raised his voice on the job. He simply showed people, quietly, exactly how things should be done. Grady never told his new crew the full story behind that surprising contract he had signed. He simply taught them, by quiet example, to treat every single stranger with real, lasting respect. He kept the same humble habits from his old life, even with steady money coming in now. He still checked his bank balance every week, just out of old habit. His daughter's insulin bills no longer felt impossible to pay. The eviction notice in his pocket eventually went straight into the trash where it belonged. He moved his small family out of that basement apartment within the year. The new place had real windows that let in actual morning light. The new apartment sat on the 2nd floor of a quiet brick building nearby. His daughter chose the bedroom with the biggest window herself. His daughter grew taller, healthier, and a little less worried with each passing season. She never fully understood the whole story, only that her father seemed lighter somehow. Some evenings, after work, he would sit on his porch and watch the street grow quiet. He thought often about that cold, rainy night that had changed everything for his family. He never forgot the sound of rain on the station windows or the squeak of his old mop wheels. Those small details stayed with him long after the hard years finally ended. He thought, too, about Caleb Mercer, who still worked the same night shift under new management. They never spoke again, but Grady never wished him any real harm. A single act of small kindness, born from almost nothing at all, had completely rewritten one tired man's entire future for good. It had also reminded one quiet giant that real power rarely ever needs to raise its voice to be felt. He kept the power bank close for years afterward, tucked into different jackets, as seasons changed. Friends who noticed it never quite understood why he valued something so small. Sometimes the biggest changes in a life start with the smallest, quietest choices. A shared charger, a simple sandwich, a few honest words spoken in an empty room. Far away, in a different city, that same small $12 power bank still sat tucked inside a vest pocket. It remained there, quietly, as a daily reminder of one freezing night and one honest, struggling man. This story is a work of fiction inspired by everyday acts of quiet kindness. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental and meant only to honor the human spirit.